Hey everybody, I'm here to give you a kind of a behind the scenes look at how I make a reboot. This is going to be the first in a series of videos that kind of goes over the process I use. We're going to start by looking at the script and blocking out the pages, figuring out the number of frames and where things go, things like that. Then I'll show you how I pencil or draw the art. Then we're going to add some ink, scan it in to the computer, and even show you how I color it and add the words. And so you'll kind of get a really good idea of how it starts out as just a blank piece of paper or words on a page and moves on to a sketch, and how that becomes this, which will eventually become that. So it's going to be one part behind the scenes look, but also one part tutorial for those who may be interested in making a comic book of their own and want to see one way of doing it. I'm certainly no authority on this type of thing, and this is just the process that I use. It works for me, and I encourage everyone to experiment and learn what works for them. So I hope these videos are interesting and informative and at least a little bit fun. And so let's get started. Let's get the script. Okay, so here's the script. I actually have two different versions. One was kind of a rough, kind of planning stage script. The text was pretty much the same. I've had to make a few slight changes, but this is where I figured out how many pages the book was going to be, where the page breaks were, different panels, kind of brainstorming how the book was going to look. Once I had a pretty good idea, I retyped it up, or I shouldn't say retyped, I just kind of, made some edits and reprinted out. So this version, every page has this black box going around it. As far as formatting, there doesn't seem to be an industry standard for comic book scripts. And it seems like you can kind of do whatever you want as long as it makes sense. And since I'm the only one working on this, I don't really plan on submitting this script to a publisher. I don't have an artist who I'm working with it. I'm the writer, the artist, the colorist, everything else. So I can really do whatever I want. So for me, it made sense to put this black outline on every page, because that shows my actual drawing area of the comic book. It's not the full size of the book. This is a nice little graphic novel. It's a little bit smaller, but this shows, that's because I wanted to have a white outline going around each page, or border, kind of like this one has a black border going around each page. I wanted to do the same thing, except white. And so this is my actual drawing area, my actual working area that I have to work with. So I kind of wanted to get a real spacing of what I was working with. So I also wanted to make the script look as much like the book as possible. So it's two-sided. Here's our cover. We have the little Navajo proverb here at the beginning, and then here starts page 1. Now, at the top of each page, I've got what page it is, page 1. There's also numbered the panels or frames, whatever you want to call them, on this page. So this one will have about 5 frames. And you also have 3 different voices that I'm working with, at least in book 1. Later books, we're going to introduce more characters, but for right now, we just have 3 voices we have to work with. The primary one is Mustard, the main character. The primary one is Mustard, and he's the main character. And whenever he's verbally speaking, it's going to just be in one of those little speech bubbles, type of deals like that. The other is this mysterious voice that's just, he has conversations with. We don't really know who it is at this point, but that one is just going to be block letters that kind of float in air whenever it speaks. And then we have the narration, which is Mustard's inner thoughts or just kind of generic, telling what he's doing, what he's thinking, and that's just going to be in a block of text, kind of like that. So that way we can easily differentiate who's talking or thinking or whatever the case may be. And as more characters are introduced, they'll probably be speaking with either regular bubbles or, depending on the character, may change the font or the styling to kind of give it a bit more variety and personality. So that's how we break down the page. So each panel, you got panel 1, and then the dialogue that's happening between Mustard and the voice. I don't really put any directions as to what's happening in the script because, like I said, I'm the only one working on it, so I have a pretty good idea when I was writing it what's happening. If I were working with an artist, I'd probably want to put some basically stage directions. You know, he's walking into a room or whatever the case may be. But in this case, it's not necessary. So that's how that works. And then so here you have your border, and say on this page, because this one's going to be a full spread, I put the black going just around the whole thing because it's going to be one big image with the text over on this side and then all imagery here. And you've actually seen this page before, like so. And that actually lines up fairly nicely. So that's real size, or close to it. So we have a full page, and here's the copy and our imagery. So it really, for me, this is a great way for me to really get a feel for what the comic book's going to look like when it's finished. And that's why I formatted it this way. So right now, I actually already drew page 4, page 5. I had to make some revisions. It didn't affect the entire page, primarily here and a couple of changes here. But I've already laid that out, so I'm not going to do that again. I didn't draw it all out yet, but we're going to skip this one for now, even though I don't normally like to skip pages because I already kind of know what happens here. We're good. Already drew this one and this one, and that brings us to page 8. So what we need to do is we have to figure out, well, I should say what I need to do. You guys, we'll say we. You're helping me. We need to figure out what this page is going to look like. And when I'm doing this, I don't focus on just the one page, because when you're reading a comic book, you're seeing both pages at the same time, really. Even if you're only actually reading this one's still in view. So even if you're just drawing this frame here, this frame has to play nicely with the frames above it and the entire page as a whole. And this entire page as a whole has to play nicely with the one right next to it, so that it's all a cohesive, nice-looking unit. As you can see here, the colors kind of all go together, similar sizes. You just have to do that. Otherwise, it'll look kind of crazy. So, I already have it broken down to how many pages, how many panels it's going to be. And on this one, about 5 panels. The first couple, some going back and forth between Mustard and this voice, and then Mustard narrates for a little while, and the voice comes back in. Now, how did I decide how many panels this was going to be? It wasn't arbitrary. That's kind of where this first script came into play. This one is a lot more rough in that it's got drawings all over it. You can kind of see on page 2 and 3. This is this one, where this is where I kind of did very rough sketches here. So I knew it wanted to be blank on this side. I was originally thinking that maybe I'd put the title. You can kind of say here, maybe the title here, maybe a subtitle for chapter 1, and the art primarily, or at least the character Mustard would be digging in the sand there and have all the copy, and this would just kind of be mountains. But it seemed kind of like a waste of space, and I thought it was more balanced this way, so I switched away from that. So that's where I was just doing a lot of brainstorming and figuring out, how can this, if I know this text needs to be on this page, or that's how I think is a good breaking point for it, how can I break this up into panels? And, you know, a lot of erasing. Sometimes I'm adding in a couple words. I'm kind of doing rough sketches of what I think the page might look like. And then kind of finalizing it as I go. A lot of brainstorming here. That's what most of this book is. That's why it's a bit thicker than the others. This entire section, I can't remember if I removed it completely or just moved it to another page. There's a page I want to show you in here specifically. This one. And so this is where I'm talking about where you want to really think about the page as a whole. So this is actually two different pages. Page 6 and 7, so left and right. And so you would see these two picture pages together. And so I wanted to make sure that these boxes weren't too repetitive. They weren't necessarily, the flow made sense, that the eye would start here and kind of go around and then take you to the next page as needed. And so I kind of like this, but eventually I switched over and said I'm going to start by it. That means I like this one better. So this page actually stayed about the same, but I switched this one up just slightly. And really, this is kind of all you need, because basically, if it looks clunky and awkward with no art in it, and you don't like the way the boxes are laid out, putting art in it, even if it's amazing art, it's not gonna read well. It's gonna look clunky anyway. So you want to make sure that your layout itself is acceptable and clear and it's easy to follow before you waste a bunch of time drawing art in it that you may end up throwing out. So here's page 8, where we are now, and it looks like I actually didn't do a whole lot of sketching out here, so this is a great place for us to start. But it does show where I kind of broke down and differentiated who was speaking, Mustard, or the voice, and where I thought some good breaks would be, and kind of blocked out that a little bit. So we're going to take that a little further and keep going with it today. Alright, so now, as I kind of mentioned before, you want to make sure the panels look good, but also within that page, and so the words tell a story, the panel pacing tells a story, but your characters are kind of actors, and they need to tell the story too. And you can't hear their voices, so their body language and facial expressions and the angles that you use need to express the emotion of the scene. So I'm just going to kind of read through this, and I'm not going to use a whole lot of emotion. And this is how I write it. It's weird, and I feel kind of weird doing it, but I kind of pretend like I'm an actor or actress or whatever, and take on that character and kind of try different ways of saying it and see how it makes me feel and how I think I would react if I were in that situation or if I was that character, and so I'll try it a few different ways and we'll see what happens. Alright, so in this scene, Mustard is, on the previous page, Mustard was pretty frustrated with this voice. He's out in the desert, he's by himself, he's hungry. One of the ways he survives is by looking for and eating bugs. And so he's searching for bugs right now, and the voice gave him not the greatest of idea, didn't work out too well, and he's pretty frustrated. He's back to digging, and he's not real excited about it. Digging in the ground looking for grubs or ants or anything he can find, really. And he's by a rock, a pretty big rock, that he spots. He'd already seen it, but maybe he wasn't really paying much attention to it. He had other stuff going on. So, that's where he is at. So, Mustard says, "What about the rock?" Voice says, "You can't eat a rock." Panel 2. Mustard says, "No, not eat it, but look underneath it. It's too big to move, but I could dig all around. Dig all the way under, that's where they're hiding." Panel 3. He's narrating. "I plunge my hands in, throwing dirt out of the way, reaching and scooping. It's not as dry here." Panel 4. "I feel something slimy, a slight wiggle on my finger. I scoop with both hands to my elbows in dirt. Panel 5. Then pick through my spoils, all sorts of small creatures. And the voice says, I told you you'd find them. So he finally finds the bugs. Yay. Now that was kind of boring the way I read it. I was just kind of going through it. But you can kind of see, and this is where I kind of start marking things up a little bit, if my pencil would cooperate with me. I'll grab another one. You wouldn't think it'd be so hard to find a pencil. Alright, there we go. Use this one. Alright. So this is where I start kind of marking things up. So right here where he says he plunges his hands in. Now before he was digging, he was scraping, he wasn't real enthusiastic about it, he was frustrated. But now he's plunging his hands in. And, you know, think of kind of plunging into water. That at this point he's excited, he's enthusiastic. He's throwing dirt out of the way. Whereas before it was just kind of, I'm digging, oh this sucks. So now he's excited and happy. So we're at least hopeful. So at panel 3, the mood needs to kind of change at that point. And then panel 4, he feels something slimy, a wiggle on his finger. So he's probably getting pretty ecstatic here. He's just about starved to death, and he's finally finding these bugs. So he's really happy here. And he's picking through his spoils in panel 5, and at that point he's probably eating them. And I told you I'd find them. Now, the part where that's pretty clear. At this point he's happy and excited and enthusiastic and hopeful and all that fun stuff. So we kind of know the directions that's going to go in. But at the beginning of the page, or the page before, he was frustrated and angry. So at some point we have to transition over from frustrated, annoyed, discouraged to happy and ecstatic. So there's a couple different ways I can read this beginning part, because that's where the conversation is. The first way would be, say, maybe, what about the rock? Like that could be a aha moment, and he's instantly happy right there, or not happy, you know, whatever, excited. I guess aha. What about the rock? Like he's got the idea right there. He can dig under the rock. You can't eat a rock. I don't know how many ways you can deliver that, and since we don't see this voice, that's up for interpretation anyway, but it's kind of condescending and like, duh. You can't eat a rock. It feels like dummy should almost be added at the end. So what about the rock? You can't eat a rock. Like, no, not eat it. But look underneath it. It's too big to move, but I could dig all around, dig under the way under. That's where they're hiding. So he could instantly switch right there, and I think that could totally work. But we're at a brainstorming phase, so I'm going to try a few different ways. So it could also be more contemplative, where he's really thinking about it. He doesn't quite have the idea yet. And maybe he kind of glances at the rock and is kind of, what about the rock? You can't eat a rock. And the no, not to eat it. Maybe he's still angry. No, not eat it. And, you know, but look underneath it. It's too big to move, but I could probably dig all the way around, dig under, that's where they're hiding. Kind of do that sort of thing. It's too big to move. That could potentially even be said by the voice instead of mustard, depending on how I wanted to do that. You know, if I was like, what about the rock? You can't eat a rock. No, not eat it, but look underneath it. And then the voice could say, it's too big to move. Like, what are you talking about? Like, but I could dig all around. Dig all the way under. That's where they're hiding. So I think that has some potential, and I think I like that better as opposed to just jumping right in, getting happy at the front of the page. Yeah, I think I do like that better. We could also maybe in the beginning we show him digging and he's frustrated. Maybe he's sweating, he's wiping his brow, he's annoyed, and he kind of glances at the rock, and then he goes back to digging and looks at it again. Maybe he sits there for a minute and stares at it and is kind of, huh. We could probably have 2 or 3 frames where he's not actually saying anything, but just showing that there's some calculations happening in his head. He's kind of formulating an idea, and slow it down even more, because we're only 5 panels here, so 5 panels is relatively few for a comic book page. You can easily fit 6 to 9, maybe even 12, depending on what's going on, the pacing, and what you're drawing. So that's completely, we could easily add in a couple more panels. That wouldn't be a problem. 2, maybe 3. I probably wouldn't go more than that. And have him, kind of look at that rock and look back at the ground. Maybe scratch his chin. What about the rock? You can't eat a rock. No, not eat it. But look underneath it. It's too big to move, but I could dig all around. Dig all the way under. That's where they're hiding. Yeah, that's where they're hiding. And maybe he could say that twice. And maybe the second time is where he gets excited and he kind of jumps up and goes and starts digging underneath the rock and plunges his hand in and he's throwing dirt and all that fun stuff. So I think I like the slow build up there the most. I think that works for me. So I think that's the direction we're going to go. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to talk about? And again, since we're doing these pages, they're 2 pages, but they're side by side. I'm basically going to do the exact same thing with page 9. But I'm not going to go through that again because, for one, I don't want to give away too much of the story to you guys just yet. But also, this will be a pretty long video if we do this for every single page. So, do the same thing for all of them. So, I'm just kind of rough this in. And it's not going to be the most beautiful art you've ever seen. The proportions aren't necessarily going to be right, but roughly the size. And having this black frame here makes it easier because I kind of I'm looking at the proportions there and kind of mimicking that just on a smaller scale. So if we say, this light is making things, give me a little bit of a glare. The first, say maybe 2 or 3 frames. I think 3 might work. And so we'll have 3 frames here. And they can be short frames because it's just showing his face. So maybe he's digging in the sand right here. His hair's kind of falling down. This is Mustard's face. And, he's got some sweat. He's frowning. And, this doesn't have to be beautiful art. It's just kind of, I might even make him put his hand very gestural, loose, just seeing what happens. Kind of letting the pencil decide what's happening. I don't know if you can see that, but that's Mustard with his arm. There's his arm, there's his head, there's a big drop of sweat, and he's just, this is so annoying. And, of course, I'm going to draw the rock in the background. It's a big kind of boulder. And I'm going to put I think it's important, I'm going to have some cacti around it, or some sort of shrubbery, so that there is moisture there, so that he will find the bugs. And then maybe he kind of sits up and stops and is looking around and kind of sees. I'm looking at the back of his head if he looks that way. But that might be okay if his hair's down that way and he's just looking around and I may have to switch the angle. I don't think I like looking at the back of his head, because you got to keep it consistent. If he's facing this way starting out, then you can't have him facing that way. It just, that's weird. He stays that way, so his head would have to turn. Well, that's his face, and he's looking this way. He's looking that way, and he turns his head that way. His face is away from the camera. Not camera, but that's kind of how I call it, camera. So we can't see it anymore, which could work. Not necessarily required that we see his face at all times. So maybe it might work. And then he kind of goes back. Actually, maybe let's make it 4 panels. And maybe he's kind of turns his head. It kind of has a, So, something like that. And maybe he looks at the rock again. And maybe we might even want to zoom out a little bit, give a little bit more space, and show more of the rock at that point. And he's got his head turned to us again. Maybe he's turned all the way around. So we could probably do, I think I like 4 panels. I initially thought 3. It's kind of a setting up. He looks at it, he thinks, and he looks at it again. And then, actually he might be able to say, what about the rock right there? So that's will be our first line. And so because it's very scribbly, blah. You do want to think about early on where the dialogue's going to go. Because that would be no fun if you draw these great pictures and then you forgot to put the dialogue bubbles, and then you got a bubble on top of the kid's head or his face or hiding something really cool. So, yeah, I think that could potentially work. Probably make these even smaller since there's no dialogue happening. What about the rock? Or that might just be him looking. So that will be kind of the prelude to what we have here. Then what about the rock? And then you can't eat a rock. And then at that point he's, let's see, he's probably going over to the rock to inspect it. It's too big to move. At that point he's probably got his hands on the rock and he's kind of looking at it like, yeah, it's too big to move, but I could dig all around. So I might want to do a small frame of him asking, what about the rock? And then the voice answering, you can't eat a rock. And then shows him, and he's kind of examining this rock right here. And so it's a big rock, and maybe he's got his arms on it. He's kind of bent over. I'm like, no, he's not even paying attention to this voice being negative. Like, I could dig all the way under it. He's getting kind of excited here. And then he plunges his hands in, and we're going to do maybe something like that. And that. And I think that would work. Oh, let me show you this. So one day I just kind of went through a bunch of my comic books and looked at different page layouts. So, you could start out with like a big shot and then another one where it's divided up and down. Just a bunch of different ways to break up a page. And so every now and then I use this as a reference. If I can't think of a way, like, that's a cool way I can show this. And then, so you can do that. But I think this type of layout might work well for this page. Yeah, So we're going to explore that a little bit more. We're going to go with that for now. And because my camera only lets me record 20 minutes at a time, we're going to stop for a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm looking at this again, and what we have here, and in second thought, I think I would rather, because this is a lot of dialogue, I think I'd rather have maybe 5 boxes up here, up top. There's actually a nice little sample here. So there's 5 narrow boxes, and then 1 big wide one, and then just dividing the bottom row in half, and that would give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I would need still 1 more, so I could potentially split that in half that way, or make that 3. And I think that will probably work a little bit better. So now I just grab some paper, which I got a nice little stack of down here. And at this point, we're not doing anything fancy, it's just regular old copy paper, Xerox paper that you can get from Walmart, Staples, I mean, you know, whatever. Nothing fancy. And I'm just going to kind of sketch this out a little bit more and get a better idea of what this is going to look like. I think I know how I want the boxes laid out. But the art within each box, I'm not so sure about. So, but we're thinking something along, actually, we'll divide this into 5s, and then we have a big picture here where he's kind of examining this rock. And I've actually had to draw this rock already for previous pages, because this is a rock he's kind of hiding behind. There's some cacti in the background. Gotta keep our stuff consistent there. And there's some various succulents and whatnot basically growing out from around this rock. And Mustard is going to be examining, maybe kneeling, and kind of hunched over, probably one hand up high, the other hand low. He's got his big sombrero, kind of always draw that in the sketch. He may have left his bag, got all worked up. He has a bag he normally carries, and that just might be laying on the ground nearby. And I think that would probably work. If anything, maybe I might drop his head a little lower and really make him kind of examining this thing. And then we can have a nice big speech bubble here. Because there's nothing important over there, just some cactuses and mountains, or sorry, cacti and mountains in the background. So we got plenty of space for him to have this little, and it's a relatively short monologue, but, and actually the second time he says that's where they're hiding, that would be a nice little close-up. So actually I might put another box right there. And maybe he's looking down and has like a little smirk on his face. That's where they're hiding. So, and then we just have to shift this over a little bit. I plunge my hands in. So think I would rather go the plunging my hands in, throwing dirt out of the way, reaching and scooping. So that's, we got some little box for narration. It's about 4 lines. Boom, 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 boom. And let's see, how could we draw that? I think the more important part isn't so much panel 3 that he's digging in the dirt. He's been doing that for a while. But when he feels something slimy. And so I think maybe that box should be bigger than this one. And I don't know, will we zoom in on his face or on his hands, or maybe even draw underneath the rock? Yeah, I think maybe a close-up on his face. You know, or like his eyes getting excited. Like, because he can't actually see the bugs, he feels them. Like, I feel something slimy. It's like wiggle on my finger. I scoop with both hands, my elbows to dirt. And then pick through my spoils and maybe show his hands. He pulls his hands up and they're filled with bugs. Which might be a nice throwback to what earlier page. We showed a close-up of his hands and they were filled with just dirt and empty. And so it'd be kind of maybe a nice little kickback reminder to that. Whereas before, there was nothing, he was just dirt. And then we'll have some little text there, and pick through my spoils, all sorts of small creatures. I told you we'd find them. Okay, I think that works. And then I already kind of illustrated this part up here. That might be a little too, that's very creepy looking pig. He looks like Invader Zim right there. But that's okay, it doesn't matter. We're not going for beautiful masterpieces of art here. We're just going for getting a rough idea of what's going to be on the page. This one was, I plunged my hands in. Alright, I kind of like, maybe we show the back of him. And he's hunched over, and maybe he's scooping it and just throwing the dirt, and maybe dirt is coming over his shoulder even. He's overzealous about it. And so maybe the text is actually over here instead of over there. And so he's kind of hunched over, he's digging into the dirt, the rock is right here with the cactuses, and yeah, we'll show the dirt just kind of spraying, not spraying, but you know, he's just kind of kicking up a cloud of dust. I don't know if it'd be better to go that way or up that way. I can play with that a little bit more. But I do like this part, and I think we could probably make these boxes perhaps different sizes to show what's happening, and maybe make them even shorter. And perhaps make them more floating boxes. Kind of like how this one is floating inside the frame, whereas these guys have kind of more of a clear blocked off. So they'll all have a very thin white border around them, like that. However, this one, since it's inside the frame, it's kind of a zoom in there. It doesn't have the white frame, so it has the art around it. So these, it might be nice to do the same thing, just kind of do some floating little frames inside. And you can see the background around here. Takes up a little bit more space that way, but it might be a cool way to do it, and I could probably make them slightly different sizes and give it a little bit more interest. So I think that I like that, and that's probably the direction we're going to go with this page. So to save you guys a little bit of time, I'm probably going to work through page 9 just to make sure it's going to work well with page 8 here and not be confusing or anything or repetitive, because that's what I kind of look for when you're doing the spreads. You want to make sure, well, you already said that, make sure they look nice together. So I'll work through that. I won't make you sit through that again, and then when we come back we'll start drawing this page out. Oh, by the way, this is just a regular mechanical pencil, 0.7, that's it. Yeah. Alright, here we are back again, and I just finished doing page 9, getting that all plotted out. Originally I had it broken down to 4 panels, but I decided to do a little split here. I made it 5 frames in this guy, so we'll have one big one, kind of a wide angle shot, and then 3 smaller little frames here, and that kind of takes care of that one. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Not a ton happening on this page, so it's pretty easy to work with. But then you line it up with page 8, because we wanted to make sure they work together side by side. And if you remember, I initially had 4 panels going up top, and I was actually thinking about switching it to 5, but I realized that might be a little bit too much going on up top, so I brought it back down to 4. With panels 1 and 4 being wider, because 1 is kind of an establishing shot, 4 being having some dialogue on there, so I want to have a little bit of space, and 2 and 3 just basically him turning his head back and forth, so I figured I could probably cheat and steal a little space there. But then when you put them side by side, you see here I had the bigger box here, and then 2 smaller ones stacked on top of each other. And even though I like the way that looked, and I still do, when placed next to this one, it's page 9, it's a little bit much. I do like to keep things consistent, so I like to have like the backward background continuing across pages, across panels. I think it's kind of a cool effect in this particular book. And I like having the baselines of these 2 frames lining up, but it just felt like too much there. Like that could be confused maybe as one long panel, or instead of reading from across and then down again, you may get confused and read this way and then maybe keep going, and I didn't want to do that. So I think by putting this bigger panel this way, just kind of restructuring it a little bit, that gives you a bit more of a break and separates the 2 pages, and I think it just works better overall. I actually had another drawing here. I don't know where I put it, but initially when I put these 2 together side by side, the panels didn't quite, I didn't like the way they lined up exactly. Initially, something like that, and then we have 4 panels here, and then this guy, and that is basically how it went. And then this one initially was like that, and then that, and there. And the proportions are right there. But these guys weren't lined up, and it looked awkward to me. So just kind of shifting it, changing the proportions of the panels, changing the sizes just a little bit, and making it flat there, I think looks a lot better. And I don't know where I put that drawing. It was It's around here someplace, but seeing how I'm not going to be using it, I guess it doesn't really matter. I actually had to redo this video because something went wrong with the camera. I didn't realize it till the end. It didn't record. So, try to remember what I said from the last time. Last time it was perfect. The first time I did it, absolutely perfect. It was the best thing anyone had ever seen, and it's just gone forever. Sometimes it's like that. So, that being said, this is the direction we're going to go with. So that's what panels, or pages 8 and 9 are going to look like right here. We're going to stop here for today. And then on the next video, I will start penciling all this and get some real artwork done. So this is just kind of phase 1, figuring out how it's going to look, what it's going to be like, and we'll go on from there. Hope you guys enjoy, and if you don't enjoy it, I'm sorry. Oh, what I did realize, I should probably say this now, I didn't realize when I was, this is a wristband I wear all the time, and I didn't realize how prominent it was. I didn't even notice, I forget that I'm wearing it. It's not a big deal because I wear it every day. But it's a friend of mine who works for Common Ground gave it to me, and they are an organization that kind of works with survivors of domestic violence, abuse, human trafficking. They raise awareness for various mental illnesses, and they also work on providing options to people who are considering suicide to try to help keep them alive. So this is a bracelet. I will not give up. And if you have ever contemplated suicide, you can give that a call and they'll help you out. This is an organization that I actually like a lot because I'm very passionate about human trafficking. Not so much about the trafficking itself, but stopping it. I think it's pretty horrible. It's kind of a word that seems to be getting thrown around a lot lately, but human trafficking is basically the prostitution of children or forced labor of adults or children, whether it be sexual or actual physical labor. It's basically modern day slavery, and that's not cool. So they're working to stop that, and I like to support those guys as much as possible. And it kind of applies because this story does deal with people who are abused, who may have basically a form of human trafficking kind of happens in this. There's definitely some mental disorders and suicidal thoughts and things like that, so it does kind of apply. I wasn't planning on doing a plug for this, but I figure if I'm going to be wearing it, it's going to be in the video, and it was kind of obvious to me that I was wearing it as I was watching the previous video. I figured I'd at least talk about it. So there's my plug, and if you guys want to learn more about them, there you go. I think it's kind of a cool bracelet. So that's all I've got to say about that. See you next time.